I'm not running a campaign on the back of who I am. I'm running a campaign on the back of what the community needs and what it feels.
I am the better qualified candidate by a mile. And Muslim people are not stupid. They know that.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. What's going on? Robert Carter here, reporting once again for Five Pillars. My journey across the UK for the general election has taken me to some pretty fascinating areas to learn about some very unique stories. However, today I've travelled to Blackburn, where there is a very unique story happening, a very interesting story which demands attention. We should have been here a lot earlier, but unfortunately we haven't been able to make it until this late stage in the general election race. But there is a major split in the anti-genocide pro-Palestine camp in a seat with a very significant Muslim community, a very large Muslim community here. It's a Labour stronghold seat usually, and many would have hoped that Blackburn would actually be an example of an area where Labour would be in panic mode because of the wider community Muslim mobilisation against Labour, with the ambition of politically punishing Labour for their immoral stance on Gaza. However, because of this split in the anti-genocide camp between three major candidates here, it seems as if actually this could be quite an easy win for Labour unless the split somehow is resolved and the community can unite behind one key candidate that can then take the fight to the Labour Party. The three candidates which have stepped up is local-born Muslim Adnan Hussein, who appears to be running a very convincingly looking campaign based on local mobilisation and community support and backing from local power brokers within his own community. But then you also have a very well-known left-wing journalist, Craig Murray, who has parachuted in here and is also running on a pro-Palestine, anti-Labour campaign. His headquarters you can see just behind me. But then also there is a third candidate who has stepped up, another local Muslim, Tiger Patel, who has become somewhat of a local celebrity here. He has achieved some political success in the past, being elected to the position of councillor for the Conservative Party. He has since stepped away from the Conservative Party and is now standing as an independent in the general election, again on a pro-Palestine campaign. This split has, of course, rocked the wider community, even outside of Blackburn. Many Muslims are unimpressed. But I've come up here to basically see what's going on, whether the split will ever be resolved, and what chances any of these candidates may have of confidently at least challenging Labour, if not outright beating them, should they decide that they will stand fully in this upcoming general election. So let's see how it goes.
This isn't the first time you stood in Blackburn. You've done so, I think it was in 2005, correct me if I'm wrong, and that you didn't win there. What do you think gives you the confidence? Do you have what it takes to win now?
In 2005, Jack Straw had Blackburn completely tied up. And virtually every Muslim vote in 2005 went to Jack Straw. And that's after we all knew that there were no WMD in Iraq. That's after 1 million Iraqis had been killed, and still virtually every Muslim in Blackburn voted for Jack Straw. And frankly, that's a shame and a disgrace. That's a shame and a disgrace. And it's something which I think the community here has now woken up to and realizes they have to redeem themselves from, because that's a stain on the reputation of the Muslim community in Blackburn forever. And it should be. It should be. But they can redeem themselves from it. But that's why. I mean, when I came here in 2005, I got a couple of thousand votes. Nobody knew who I was. I was just an independent. I arrived on Blackburn Station with a suitcase, never having been here in my life, and not knowing a single person in the town. Literally nobody. And had 4 weeks to fight an election campaign. So I think the fact that at the end of that, 2,000 people voted for an independent candidate shows how good at campaigning I am. And whoever wins this election would need to have votes from the non-Muslim community, because people forget that the Muslim community is actually substantially in the minority in Blackburn. The majority of people in the seat are in fact not Muslim.
I'm not running a campaign on the back of who I am. and running a campaign on the back of what the community needs, what it feels, and running a campaign on the back of not a Palestinian flag. The pain that we're going through because of the massacres that people in Gaza are suffering from is horrific. And the pain of the Gazans is running through our veins this very moment.
I think if I've read correctly, Craig Murray, he has parachuted in here, but he claims that he was invited to do so. So he hasn't just come out, he would argue he hasn't come out of nowhere himself either, although he's not a local resident. He's been invited to come here, and now he claims that he's ultimately been backstabbed. That's one of the things he's alleged. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, I've provided comment in the past, and I will do now as well. Firstly, I wasn't in any of the discussions held between Craig and the independent councillors as we know them. When Craig made a decision or announced a decision to stand, most of the 12 independent councillors were candidates then. They deny this version of event. Now, you've got one man who says he's been invited, and you've got 12 other who say that isn't how it happened. If we're to do the math, the testimony of 12 would override the testimony of one.
I think it's fair to say, though, that the Muslim vote is very, very important here. You mentioned as well that Jack Straw has benefited from the Muslim vote in his time. Given that that's the case, do you think that you have lost that Muslim vote now, given how the campaign has unfolded, the name calling, the mudslinging, whether it's your fault or not? Do you think that you've lost that penetration into the Muslim vote here?
Absolutely not. I mean, undoubtedly, absolutely not. The so-called community leaders and the corrupt system of vote bartering and of trying to trade off votes of families. My family has 800 votes, this family has 200 votes. That's collapsed. That was a thing of the past.
Do you think that if everything was to go your way, the split ends, you're the main guy, the community rallies around you, do you think that you've still got what it takes to beat Labour here? Because I wonder if the Muslim vote alone is enough to actually win the election. You may need some of those white non-Muslim votes as well.
Well, this was said by Craig, and in response, I said to Craig, just because you've got white skin doesn't mean you'll get the white vote. Even the indigenous community does see sincerity through a person. I've been campaigning within the white areas, and the response has been heartwarming. It's been brilliant.
I saw that 5 Pillars put out a video saying this should be settled by a coin toss. And personally, I think that's a bit daft.
As I said before, flip a coin if you have to, okay? One of you has to step down. Craig Murray and Adnan Hussain cannot stand in that constituency. And if you do, Labour will win and everyone else will draw their own conclusions about you guys.
But I was prepared to do it, even though I am the better qualified candidate by a mile. You know, over 20 years ago, I resigned my post as a British ambassador in order to blow the whistle on CIA torture and extraordinary rendition. I've been campaigning against the Prevent programme. I've been campaigning for Palestine since I joined the Friends of Palestine in 1977. When the 2009 and 2014 massacres happened in Gaza, I was on each occasion addressing 500,000 people in Hyde Park. I was inside the International Court of Justice. The South African cabinet, when they decided to activate the Holocaust Convention, my articles on how to do it were on the cabinet table in front of them, amongst other papers, but my articles were included in the bundles in front of them. You know, it's absolutely crazy to claim that any of the other candidates have qualifications any near mine. And Muslim people are not stupid. They know that. They know that. And because somebody who views himself as a community leader says to them, you shouldn't vote for the most qualified candidate, you should vote for this bloke because he's a Muslim, doesn't mean they're going to do it.
This has to be done seriously. I'm not a man who plays games or tricks. it's got to be done in a manner which is constructive. I'm not happy for history to remember me as a man who flipped the coin on the back of representation that is there, or it will be provided for the Gazans in the House of Parliament, and all that to be done on the back of a coin flip. I feel insulted by the suggestion. Indeed, again, I say I'm happy to stand down, but it can never be done on the back of a coin flip.
I would like to mention that some of those community leaders that you have mentioned, they include councillors who, you know, have won elections here on a local election basis. They also may include people who are considered elders in the community, who I think it's undeniable, given the cultural significance of community elders and the respect that Muslims have for their elders, that their claim that they do represent or have some significance if they endorse a candidate. I think that's hard to deny, if I'm being honest with you.
If I'm being honest with you, it's hard to deny that those councillors you mentioned were elected with my endorsement and George Galloway's endorsement. And they were elected for Gaza. Nobody knows their names. They're just local councillors. Do you know the name of your local councillor? Maybe you do. But if you do, you're in a tiny minority of a population. Nobody knows the name of local councillors. And people didn't vote for them because they're major elders of a community. People voted for them because they wanted to get Labour out because of the Gaza genocide. And you could have put up a dog as the independent councillor against Labour, and the dog would have been elected. It doesn't mean the dog then should then get to choose who will be the parliamentary candidate. This is crazy. You know, this is absolutely nonsense. Of course, I have great respect for the elders of the community. But how many of the elders of a community have actually met me and talked with me and discussed with me who is the better candidate?
What about your views on Syria, though, for example, or your views on Russia, China? Do you think that that could be a problem for many Muslims in the constituency? Do you think that they would also know about your record there?
Well, I hope they know about my record there. The first article I wrote on the persecution of the Uyghurs in China, which I can show you, I wrote in 2008, an article which was before anybody in the mainstream media, or 99% of the people who now campaign about it, before they'd even heard the name Uyghur. In 2008, I was campaigning for the Uyghurs. Do I support Assad? No, I don't. Do I prefer the CIA and Israel? No, I don't. So my views on this are complex. But please do not be taken in by the lies about Craig Murray's opinions that are being spread by these poisonous people.
There's no need for someone to come from outside. 20 years ago, Craig did come into Blackburn. Again, who invited him then? He got less votes than the BNP. He lost, and this was on the back of the Iraq War. The point that I make is it's extremely difficult to understand such a claim from a man who could have stood in Edinburgh if he cared about Gaza so much.
Okay, so I've been in Blackburn for a couple of days now, and it's been a very eye-opening experience, to say the least. A few things to mention. The only vote-splitting candidate who refused to make time for me out of the three was Tiger Patel. Tiger Patel came up with a variety of excuses, was refusing to call me back when he promised to do so, and every time I challenged him to give me some kind of interview, even if it's 5 minutes or less, he basically said no, he's too busy and he's got a family wedding somewhere apparently and all sorts of other things. However, interestingly enough, he did admit that he would step down from the race if Adnan decides to do so first for some reason. He didn't explain why, but I assume it's because he has a kind of personal grudge or beef with Adnan, and therefore he can't tolerate to see Adnan continuing the race. He wants to stay and compete against him. So that's that. I think after meeting and speaking to both sides, look, I mean, both sides have legitimate grievances, I think, about how things have turned out here. I think both sides have strengths and weaknesses. I think both sides genuinely care for Palestine. I think mistakes have been made on both sides, which perhaps they regret deep down, but they're not in the mood to kind of acknowledge that. I think the one thing which would have swayed me and perhaps the rest of us at Five Pillars would have been if we could clearly discover or get an accurate reading of who Blackburn's Muslims on the streets actually prefer as their candidate, who commands the actual Muslim mandate. And it's not actually very clear to figure that out. It's not easy. I'm not capable of figuring that out in the short time that I'm here. So on that basis, any idea of an endorsement from Five Pillars is very unlikely, because ultimately in a situation of fitna as it's become here, with Muslims passionately and aggressively supporting either candidate, I think it would be very unhelpful actually if Five Pillars was to come in late and then start endorsing candidates or throwing their weight around.
Are you prepared to stand on stage alongside Adnan Hussein and witness a Labour win here? Is that what you're prepared to do? Because I think that as it stands, if this continues, I find it hard to believe that any candidate has what it takes to beat Labour. I find that very hard to believe.
Of course I don't want to do that. The reason I want to be in Parliament is I've already done. I told you I was involved in formulating a strategy for going to the ICJ. I've spoken to the UN Human Rights Committee in Geneva. I do that as a private individual. Think how much more I can do for the Palestinians if I'm an MP. Think of Keir Starmer facing me every day and me asking him questions on Palestine every day in Parliament. And your people watching know Craig Murray. They know what I can do and know what I would do in Parliament. It would be a tragedy to lose that. But to stop Labour giving in, I have been prepared to agree to Five Pillars' suggestion of a coin toss to resolve it. So nobody can blame me for splitting the vote. I've done everything to try to avoid it. I'm even prepared, despite being the better candidate, to step down on a coin toss if that's the way it goes. The way Akinji did, and he's somebody for whom I've long had huge admiration, not just now, and many people have. And he's been prepared to do that, and I would be prepared to do that if it came to that.
Akinji stepped down after a discussion where it was believed that the power brokers in the community were backing the other candidate, Ajrur, I think his name is. That seems to have happened with you and Adnan as well, but you're still standing. Do you think that Akinji perhaps is actually an example where maybe you should be the one to step down? Especially if you say you respect Akinji for doing so.
Yeah. No, because here I don't accept that the community doesn't support me. I just don't accept that narrative.
Obviously, you don't want to be remembered as the man who flipped the coin, but there is a chance here that if no one breaks and that we all go into the general election with this split, that ultimately you and Craig Murray could be on stage, standing there watching Labour win and celebrate at your expense. And there's a risk there that you will go down in history as the guys, not the guy, the guys, including Tiger Patel as well, the guys who basically gifted Labour an easy win at Blackburn amid the wider Muslim mobilisation and rebellion against Labour. Would you be happy with that situation?
Look, I stood with having prayed to God that I remain sincere in the cause. I continue to pray that I remain sincere in the cause. And one way to determine it, judge sincerity, is to keep going back to the people around me. I've spent the last 2 nights asking everybody around me whether they think I'm doing the right thing. So far, the consensus that I've received is they want me to continue. But again, it's got to be a decision from within the community.
What I can say, however, and I'm pleased to hear about, is that efforts are still being made to try and find a solution to the split. There's been talk and suggestion of public hustings, as among other suggestions. However, it's very late now. I mean, if this isn't resolved sort of like today, like if I don't get a phone call in the next sort of half an hour, today sometime, then ultimately you kind of wonder what the point is. You kind of wonder what the point is in even standing a pro-Palestine candidate here, an anti-genocide candidate. Maybe to avoid the fitna, the best thing that we could possibly hope for is that all candidates back down and the main focus becomes vote scuppering or just a pure boycott. Because the fact is that although we all want to put someone forward, we all want to be the guy that stands up for Palestine, if it's going to cause local fitna, if it's going to cause local divisions in the community and we can't get that consensus behind a candidate, maybe that means that you know, we just shouldn't, this isn't the area to run a candidate. If you can't find someone better than Labour, then don't put anyone up. It's as simple as that.